Welcome to Rooted Foundation's dance debates. We're really thrilled to have you all here. At Rooted, right now, we're a really small team. We're crazily passionate about Indian dance and Indian classical dance. And I'd like to start by telling you all a little about what we do. At the heart of art, as we know, lie two important people, the art maker and the audience. For years, we've created groundbreaking work that ought to be adding value and enriching human lives, and yet our sabas and halls tell a very different story, right? Will they come? Is a question that weighs heavily on our minds each time, and that just seems to grow heavier and heavier with every time the hall remains unfilled. The audiences have their reasons, but as artists, have we really tried to seek them out? Have we walked in their footsteps? And at Rooted, this is exactly what we decided to do. Listen. Listen to our audience, understand what we fail to offer them, and understand what we miss to convince them of. We ask the questions and they have the answers, but what do we do with them? As a community, are we brave enough to accept these concerns? Are we honest enough to analyze them with an open mind? And are we ultimately able to keep the pivotal audience-artist conversation alive, where it matters the most, the stage, the performance? Conviction comes from two things: strong roots and sound arguments. While venturing towards strengthening our roots as artists is one of our Rooted central vision, with the dance debates, we are taking one small but sturdy step towards the latter. But why debate? For an argument to be fair, it's extremely important to understand that there can be differing viewpoints, and it's important to hear them all. As artists, we harbor very strong opinions on various issues concerning the world of Indian classical dance. But these opinions that we hold dear to our heart only gathers weight if it continues to convince us in the light of opposing and sometimes even unfavorable viewpoints. Opinions become conviction only when the weather challenges, like surviving gaps in understanding, loopholes, and sometimes weakly constructed premises. This debate is therefore for us to be able to, as a community, to put everything out there on the table as it is, to stare at it long and hard with an honest and truly open mind, to deconstruct an opposing viewpoint, and to logically defend one's own dearly held ideas. What we hope dance debates will achieve for our community is the culture of evidence-based, fact-based, and reason-based arguments untouched by emotion and personal biases that truly stand the test of time. So we're greatly looking forward to today, and we thank all four of you for making the time to join us with so much enthusiasm and joining and moving ahead with this. Without further ado, let me introduce you to the topic for today. The topic is the present Bharatanatyam repertoire inclusive enough? Those four will argue that it is inclusive, okay? And those against will argue that it is not inclusive. We will debate specifically on the idea of inclusivity in the Bharatanatyam repertoire. The commonly held opinion is that Bharatanatyam mainly focuses on presenting Hindu mythology. What if an audience member is not Hindu or simply may not know who Nataraja or Vishnu is? Do we then make this audience automatically feel excluded? Is it essential to tell stories that are beyond the mythical, stories that are neutral, stories that have a message, or just plain simple comedy? And is it important to make all kinds of audiences included in this experience? Inclusivity does not simply stop with religious affiliation. Are we telling everyone's stories? Kindly note that although extremely salient, we will not be steering into the subject of inclusivity when it comes to the practitioners of Bharatanatyam, whether it be from a point of view of caste, financial status, gender, etc. We will reserve that for another debate. This debate will focus solely on content, inherited, currently practiced, as well as newly created. Okay. The topic that we've chosen today was actually a question raised by one of our audience members, Jay Surya, who had participated in our very first Rooted audience games. And we were actually hoping that he will join us today. He was scheduled to join us today. He's actually in Spain, but I believe there's a huge snowstorm in Spain, so there's absolutely no Wi-Fi. But what we've done is we've been able to catch hold of Deva, who was another audience in the same team. So she was present in the same episode, and she's gracefully agreed to join us today, and she will be the one you will be convincing. Team 1 is represented by Nitya and Surabhi, and Team 2 by Kassiyet and Kuhokee. I'd like to invite you at this point to just go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Nitya. I currently live in the Bay Area. I'm a student of Guru Rukmini Vijay Kumar from Bangalore, and I'm kind of nervous for this debate because this is the first time I've done a formal debate where, you like you said, it's not just about having beliefs; it's about having solid points to substantiate your beliefs. So I'm really looking forward to speaking and listening to what the other team has.
Surabhi?
Hi, I'm Surabhi. I'm a dancer currently living in the Bay Area as well. And I'm traveling in the same boat as Nitya. This is my first formal debate, and I'm nervous too. I'm originally from Bangalore. I have multiple teachers. Initially learned under Guru Raman, then Radha Sridhar Bhanumati ma'am, and currently training under Maven Co. So yes, excited to be a part of this.
Hi, I'm Kuhokee. I'm a dancer based in New York. I was born and brought up here. I'm a student of Srimati Guru Gargi Chattopadhyay. And this is not my first debate, but it is my first dance debate. So I'm still very, very nervous. But as Nitya and Surabhi both said, I'm also looking forward to presenting my opinions in a targeted way, and then also listening to the other side and see what they have to say.
I'm actually from Kazakhstan, and I started learning dance there at the age of 6. And then at some point, I went to learn dance more in Delhi, and currently I'm based in the Bay Area. It's been just a few weeks since I'm here, actually. So thank you so much for having us. Thank you so much for all this. Thank you.
Lovely. So before we move on, I want to kind of stress that while the format is very formal, right? We need a format to kind of also kind of take this discussion in a logical manner. And while the format is formal, I really would love for you all to kind of take this as a safe space where you can kind of talk and say, we always have editing, so don't worry if there's something. Okay, and I think these it's fantastic to have this space, right? Because as dancers, our medium of communication is the body. And I think debates, this particular dance debate would help us find that voice, right? That we all need to kind of talk back to our critics, to our audiences. And I think that that's really the spirit of discussion that we wanted to kind of encourage through Rooted. And we found that that space really did not exist. You know, we talk in our own little circles all the time. And you know, and what was interesting also, we started finding that a lot of us have the same questions, and it was interesting that the audience had very clear answers that kind of went together, but we did not have a space for both of them to come, and that's exactly what we're doing over here. And we also found that the more informal and comfortable that space is, that relationship seems to grow, and that's also why I'm constantly asking you all, just have fun. Okay, so we'll now go ahead and begin with the very first round, which is the talking points round. Apurva, are you ready? I'm just going to, okay, there you go. Okay, so for the first time, just to remind you all, both teams will be kind of coming up, will be able to see what your opponent's strategies are. Is the slide big enough for you guys to see, or let me, okay. Can you see them? Okay. So both teams will now get 4 minutes to study each other's case. Just to remind you all, at this time, you can mute and have a conversation over the phone. And we hope at the end of 4 minutes, we are hopeful that you will be ready with 3 different ideas. One is to choose the 3 strongest talking points that you will present as part of your arguments, and your opponent's strongest talking point and your opponent's weakest talking point. So you can just kind of use the serial numbers listed against what you've already suggested and just communicate that. So if you're all ready, we'll start with our very first round. Okay, so we will move on to now round 1, which is holding fort. Each team gets 5 minutes to present arguments in favor of their top 3 talking points that you've already communicated to Apurva. What we would like is for each team to nominate 1 member, take turns in every round. Okay, and before you start, we'd also like you to kind of state what 3 points you will be kind of talking about in your 5 minutes. We'd like to encourage you to kind of have as many supporting points, citations if you can, examples, anything that can support your case. Okay, we will begin now with team 1. I'm going to time you. You have 5 minutes to present your case. And if you can tell us who will be going, and that person can start introducing. Okay, your time starts now.
Hi, so I will be representing team 1. 4 is Bharatanatyam repertoire inclusive enough? So I want to start off by saying that our strongest talking points, according to us, is the fact that in Bharatanatyam repertoire, we create an experience, that emotions are universal and not limited to a particular dance form or a particular art form even, or any like globally they're universal. And the third strongest point according to us is that in the current Bharatanatyam repertoire, there is a lot of scope to expand within the framework of the form itself. So these are the 3 talking points that we have picked. So I want to start off by saying that Bharatanatyam repertoire in itself is not limited. It comes down to the way that we practice the form and the way that we present the form. Now, suppose we take the case of, like, all of us go to the movies. So when we go to watch a movie, more often than not, we enter the theater not knowing anything about the character, not knowing anything about the plot, not knowing anything about what to expect from the movie. Through the course of the movie, however, we start developing certain connection with some character. We start to hate a certain character, and like by the end of the movie, when the character that you really enjoy and like feels happy, we feel happy. We celebrate their victories. We cry. There are so many emotions that we are made to feel through the course of a movie, just in the way that it's presented and the way that the characters are built. Similarly, I believe that in a Bharatanatyam repertoire, the audience member who's coming to watch the performance, they can completely enter the performance without knowing who Krishna is, who Nataraja is, who this Nayika is. Anybody can enter and they need not know who these people are, but as a performer, we can create an experience for them where they relate to the story of this character, and maybe they don't have to leave thinking, oh, Krishna is such a great god, but they can leave thinking, oh, that thing that guy did, that looked fun, or that was really nice what he did. I celebrated his victory, like his victory felt like my victory. So that experience is what we can give them, and there's plenty of scope within the current repertoire to give that to an audience. The repertoire itself, we take it, it's currently presented in the form of a Margam format. Predominantly, the way we practice it is through a Margam format. And we think that the Margam format is structured in a way that it takes the audience in slowly and helps them to enjoy the overall performance by making them feel included over time, like it builds up. For instance, when we take pieces like Alaripu or Pushpanjali, these are pure Nrita pieces that just exude like joy. So for an audience member who say has never seen a Bharatanatyam performance and they're coming into a performance to watch, and they are introduced first to an Alaripu or Pushpanjali, a piece like a Nrita piece, this is their first introduction to the music, the costume, the dancer, the footwork, the movement, the everything is introduced to them for the first time through these proper Nritta pieces. So it familiarizes them with what this Nritta is. And the fact that these pieces automatically possess a sense of joy will make them connected with something like a positive feeling. And then we move on to a Varnam, where it's the main piece, it's the crux of a Bharatanatyam performance. When they're in the Varnam, they're not thrown off by the jatis automatically, because that part of it is already been made familiar to them. The music is already familiar to them. So when they come to a Varnam, they can just let go of not thinking about decoding these aspects of it, and they can just really enjoy and get into who this Naika is, what is this person, what is the story that she's telling. And then we move on to portray like Padams and Javalis. And traditionally, if you think about Padams and Javalis, they're stories of women in love. And that's something that's really universal. Like, people fall in love all the time. People have fallen in love many centuries ago, and people continue to fall in love today, and people probably will continue to fall in love for years to come and generations to come. So the pieces can easily refer to women, not of some other time, of some bygone time. It can easily refer to women from today as well. If we think about the poetry of these Padams and Javalis, they were written by poets who either were writing about women they saw around them, or some people even believe that the poetry came from women themselves who wrote about their own experiences and their own relationships, their lords or their kings. It's to be noted that these poems were not originally written for a god. They were written for kings, they were written for the lords of these women. So it's not that, like everything in Bharatanatyam is to do with Hinduism, everything is to do with a god, and if you're not religious, you're not going to relate to it. If we break it down to really like simplify it to the point of what is the emotion that I'm trying to convey in this piece, then it can be made relatable to any person in the audience, and everybody can feel something from watching a Bharatanatyam performance. Now, the stories that we tell through our pieces, they held good many years ago, they hold good today, and I feel like they will continue to hold good for years to come. So, and then the Margam concludes with a Tilana, which is like another exuberant piece. And I feel like maybe the Tilana is a piece where we include it in the end just so the audience goes out with a feeling of elation. Maybe like you have a really sad padam or something, you don't want them to feel, okay, like if they're feeling sad about it, but like ending on a high note is how the Tilana. So the way that the Margam is structured is to make the audience feel included, is to make them feel a part of it, and to create an experience for them that ultimately after the Tilana they feel like, oh, I had fun, it was enjoyable for me. So that's how the repertoire is structured. And the next thing that we want to talk about is how the repertoire is also expanding to include everybody right now. In a sense, we can say that the repertoire is inclusive enough that it allows us, or it gives us scope for expansion within the framework. So it's not essential that you create new work that is neutral or that's not to do with Hindu mythology. But if an artist wants to do that, they are able to do that. And that itself makes the art form inclusive to artists. More like when you think about inclusivity, there is inclusivity with the audience. There's also inclusivity with the artist. So in this way, it's inclusive to all artists. Suppose somebody who's born out of India, like a lot of people, I know in the Bay Area, they probably don't relate to the same stories that those who grew up in India are familiar with. So, if for them to feel like they can also tell stories that voice their opinions through the art form, the form is inclusive. Like, it gives you the scope to do that if you want. The only thing that we need to keep in mind is that you're not expanding the framework, or you're not telling these neutral stories in order to cater to an audience. This, whatever that you're doing, has to come from your own need and conviction to want to tell these stories. And that's what will make the audience automatically feel related to your work, and not because you're creating something just because you think, okay, I think right now everybody is talking about this thing, it's political and everybody's talking about it, so I'm going to make a work about it. That work will probably not reach an audience. Versus if you really feel about something, it can be as simple or as complex as it gets, but if you really feel for a cause and you want to make a work on that cause, it will reach the audience a lot more than the other thing will. So sorry, I lost track. Yeah, so this way, the way that you approach the art, it keeps the repertoire intact, and the art form has expanded its barriers, and we've increased the scope of what the Bharatanatyam repertoire can give you. There has also been a lot of work where people have just taken very traditional pieces but strung them together with a common theme. That also somewhere makes the audience feel more included, because there's some connection between the pieces, rather than, okay, this piece is separate from this piece. So just having like a theme, or having like a general idea that you base your performance on, that also makes the audience feel included. So these are like small things that a performer can do to make Bharatanatyam more inclusive. Because as times grow and as people evolve, we have to think about, this is a performing art at the end of the day, so we have to think about the audience and the state of mind that the audience is coming with to a performance. So we focus beyond telling a story or conveying a message, or like making the audience understand a certain belief that you have, and we just simplify it to creating an experience for the audience and having them experience a certain emotion. The repertoire as it is practiced today, it can be inclusive to everybody who's coming to watch it. So most Western dance forms, if we take for example, they already do this. Their productions are not based on a story or like a particular character. It's usually based on a general theme or a general emotion, and they string it together, and through the course of the performance they take the audience through that emotion, and at the end of it the audience also expects to go out with a feeling. They don't expect to like fully understand and decode every single movement or every single instance that the dancer tried to show. This is something I think that mostly Indian audiences do, where they want to understand every line, versus just like allowing us to experience the piece as a whole. And that way maybe the state of mind of the audience can also sometimes dictate whether they feel included or not to a performance. But it can also, the way that we can help it as artists is from the very conceptualization of your performance to how you first present it, how like how you market it to a targeted audience, how you present your work before they even come to watch it, can kindle their interest towards coming and watching the art form. And the second thing that an artist can do is having honest, real conviction in your work, and coming from
seconds to wind up.
Okay. Yeah. The other thing that we as artists can do is to have conviction in the work, and to be deeply involved in the work enough that that these are the limitations, and these are this is the framework of the form, and how much can I do in this form. And there is infinite that you can do like within the framework of the form, and a lot of people are creating work, and there are so many examples of work that's being created within the framework with the current repertoire, that's not necessarily so-called tradition. Or even if it's traditional, there's like ton of work that's moved people who've had zero exposure to the art form. So I just want to finish off by saying that as long as emotions are universal, irrespective of where a person is coming from in the world, irrespective of what their background is, Bharatanatyam can be inclusive.
Thank you, Nitya. I think we started off with 5 minutes, but just because this is also going at a pace where we're enjoying listening to what you're all saying, I timed Nitya, so she had about 12 minutes, close to 12 minutes. So I'm going to allow you as well. Time flies. So go ahead, and you have up to 12 minutes. So for the first round, we'll keep it a little flexible, but from the second round, and I also don't want to butt in between. So I'm going to just lift my pen when you have the last 30 seconds. And then when it comes back up again, I'd like for you all to kind of wind up, because I don't want to interrupt your conversation. Okay. So when you see my pen, that's your first warning. And then when the second pen goes up, you wind up. Team 2, you have 12 minutes. Use it all. And your time starts now.
Hi. So we're presenting the case against inclusivity in the Bharatanatyam repertoire in the sense of its content. So what are we presenting? What is being presented in the majority, and what we've been seeing but does not necessarily translate as authentic Bharatanatyam dancing. So the first point that we wanted to make is the lack of storytelling for male characters in the male perspective. You know, we have so many stories of motherhood in the roles of Yashoda and the roles of even the Divine Mother as Ma Durga, Ma Kali, Ma Lakshmi. So we have the mother very clearly represented in Indian classical dance in general, but when we speak of the father, it's almost as if it's kind of this like distant character. If we're talking about the baby Krishna, we speak so much of Krishna and Yashoda, but there's barely anything that involves Nanda, right? Even though those stories exist, right? In the Srimad Bhagavatam, there are so many instances where Nanda sees visions of Krishna, where he experiences the divinity of Krishna, but those stories are for some reason not told. So why are we doing that? And also, when we're showcasing male and female stories, are we saying that they're masculine versus feminine? Because there is a difference. There's a difference between what is masculine and what is male, and what is feminine and what is female. If you feel feminine, you don't necessarily need to be a female to feel feminine. And of course, conversely, if you feel masculine, you don't necessarily need to be a man to feel masculine. So one of those cases would be with an Ardhanarishwar piece, because people can interpret that as male versus female, or feminine versus masculine, or gender fluid, right? So it's about how we present that piece. And I guess I'm ribbing off of Nitya just a little bit, where it's, you know, we're talking about universality, but who's presenting it? It depends on who's presenting it, because some people will be very resistant to that idea of gender fluidity, where you can have someone in the audience who's transgender who relates to both sides of the coin, right? They relate to Shiva and Shakti. But if you have the presenter, if the performer or the performer's guru is opposed to showing something like that, and is showing Shiva and Shakti as two separate entities, then there's something that's lost in translation, right? And then there's also a sense of guilt if someone does feel related to both sides of the coin, because they feel like maybe they did something wrong. Maybe they're offending the person that's performing it. Maybe they're defending the whole art form, and in that way, they feel like they might be offending a whole culture, right? So that's a lot of pressure on an audience member who might see a piece like this and think, oh, well, you know, I feel both things, right? Another I guess, subset to this whole masculine and feminine storytelling is how we tell female stories. There are a lot of instances where we'll see that the Naika is yearning for her lover. She's waiting for her lover. And that love is not necessarily reciprocated many of the times, right? It's not to say that that happens all the time, but, there is this constant trope of the female who's waiting for her hero. She's imagining what her time with him is going to be like. And when we talk about how a man loves a woman, he loves her with confidence, right? He's almost always the experienced lover. He knows what to do. He takes her in. And though he loves and admires her, there's this kind of sense of he knows what to do, and we don't really need to tell his story that much. But there's a lot more appeal when you're like, oh, she's waiting, she's yearning, she's burning for her lover. But men experience that too. So why don't we show men that way? Why is yearning a feminine or a female trait, right? Why can't it be shown as a man who's waiting for his wife to, I don't know. We live in a society where women are working. They're out of the house for like the whole day. And we have men that stay home and watch over their kids. So they could easily be waiting for their partners, their wives, or whatever it is, right? It doesn't have to be limited to the Nika waiting for her lover, imagining her lover, even being rejected by her lover, and then still going after him over and over and over and over again, right? If we superimpose that same theme with the man, if he keeps pursuing a woman, that just comes off as creepy, right? But if a woman does it, it's cute and it's funny and we like watching it. And then also, is the content, is the imbalance of the gendered storytelling deterring male dancers from watching performances and also practicing, right? Because there is a glaring difference between the number of male dancers and the number of female dancers. And that translates to the number of males that come to watch our performances and the number of females that come to watch our performances. The vast majority, and of course this depends on which region you're in. I'm talking about someone who lives in New York and has seen performances in New York my whole life. The majority of people that come to see Indian classical dance are female, right? And that can be people of all ethnicities. It doesn't just limit the audience members to Indian or the South Asian diaspora. But what I see is lots of women, very small amounts of men, right? And I feel like in the human mind, that just makes sense. We want to see what we can relate to. We want to see people who look like us. So why would a man, sit in an audience for like 3 hours to watch a woman talk about womanhood the whole time? Like there's a place for that. And then there's also, and should be, a larger space for male storytelling and centering the man in a nuanced way where he's feeling emotions, he's crying, he's in despair. The only time we've ever really seen a man in despair that's done so widely is Arjuna at that time in the beginning of the Mahabharata, where he sees that he's about to kill his family, right? So exploring the nuance in that too, right? We'll talk about that for a little bit, but then it goes immediately to Krishna singing the Gita. Why can't we just focus on Arjuna? His life in itself is so expansive. He has all of these pilgrimages. He has these tapasyas that he does throughout his life. He becomes sorry, I'm not saying this correctly, Brinhala, during that year of anonymity, where he is a transgender man. And when we present Arjuna as a transgender man or a woman, it's like these stereotyped female characteristics, but why isn't there nuance there? Someone can watch that and feel empowered by it. Someone can watch this episode and feel empowered by it. So why do we shy away from that? Also, our second point is the worshiping of the goddess that we see very prevalent in Indian art in general. But we don't really show ourselves uplifting the women that we know in our lives, right? So we know we worship Ma Durga, we worship Ma Lakshmi, we worship Ma Saraswati, but why don't we show us worshiping our daughters, our sisters, our cousins, our teachers, right? These can all be strong female roles in our lives that we just don't quite show here. And of course, I've seen works here in New York being done where the whole theme is about uplifting women and women empowerment. But women have a lot of stories to tell. You know, there are stories about sexual assault, sexual abuse. Those are just not told ever, right? And when we speak about worshiping the woman and seeing the woman as a mirror of the divine, right? The divine mother, why is it that when a woman is abused, we want to shy away from talking about that in general, and then also from empowering those women that have faced abuse, right? Why can't we use our art? And art, of course, can be anything, right? You can expand art into anything that is meaningful and in ways that it's still very much Indian classical. If you look at art from different time periods, right? If we're talking about visual art, like painting, for example, Western art, for example, has gone through so many stages of different artistic expression. So a Renaissance painting like the Mona Lisa by Da Vinci will not be the same as a modern Impressionist painting by Claude Monet, right? But they're still Western. They still have that distinct Western taste. So when it comes to our Indian stories, although I don't think that the ancient stories are outdated, archaic, or anything for the same reasons that Nitya said, these are universal emotions. I do think that we need to open our minds to tell the stories of modern Indians, right? There are things that we face that everybody faces, gender inequality, for example. Sexual identity, I think that's a big thing. I've only seen one piece where people explore sexual orientation and talking to their parents about it. And it's using, you know, Carnatic music. It's using Nritya, Natya, Abhinaya to convey that story. And it was so well done that I don't think anybody in the audience would be extremely inflammatory about it, right? But again, that depends on who's watching it. An audience in India might react very differently to an audience here in New York City, where you're used to seeing lots of different things. And our last point is religion. So although I don't, as a dancer personally, I don't believe that Bharatanatyam is a Hindu dance form in the sense that it's a religious dance form. I do think that because Bharatanatyam kind of went through this long history of going from a Devadasi dance where the Devadasi was sexualized, it was an erotic dance form, and then it became this dance form that's centered on bhakti, right? It had to survive. And so in order to survive, what can you do that protects not only the Devadasi, the dancer who's doing it, but also connects the dancer to the audience member where they feel that the dancer is divine. You center it on God, you center it on devotion to God, and dance becomes a devotional practice. I'm sure all of us see dance in that way, right? We practice it because it connects us to something that's pure, that's divine. And while I don't think we should lose that, what happens is when you focus it on bhakti, it can cause people to feel a little alienated if they're from a different religious practice, right? For example, for me, I remember an Islamic museum wanted me to perform, but I really didn't have any pieces that I could do that was secular enough, unless it was like an Avaripu, for example, or a Pushpanjali, which people want to see, but they want to see something else as well. But all of my padams are Radha Krishna and all these things. And while I see the overarching themes, like this, a story about Radha Krishna is about love, it's still Radha and Krishna, if that makes sense. And people might feel some sort of resistance to that. I think my time's up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wind up your, summarize the points if you want.
Yeah, in summary, I think that all of these things are fixable. I think that as people in the modern era, as dancers, for the future generations, we can work to make the repertoire more inclusive, but as it stands, in the vast majority of people who practice it, I don't think that it is inclusive for these reasons of gendered storytelling, the woman worship that's limited to just the goddess, and then also the religious sentiments behind Bharatanatyam.
Thank you, Kuhokee. We now move on to our discussion round, where we're going to be marching in their footsteps. In this round, your team will be able to gather information from your opponents to prepare for rebuttal in rounds 2 and 3. This is also the first time where we reveal what each of your team's strongest and weakest point as proposed by your opponent is. Each team will get 3 minutes to solicit information from the opponent, and we will begin with Team 1 as always. Team 1, you get 3 minutes. The opponent's strongest point as chosen by Team 1 is number 6, religion. Casting the numbers aside, Bharatanatyam is striving to be more global than it ever was. And then their own weakest point as chosen by your opponent is there has been more dialogue, research, and questioning on the way the form is practiced. Team 1, you may ask as many questions as you want, and Team 2 is requested to not withhold and just give as much information. Your time starts now for Team 1.
Question.
Yes.
So okay, so this is the time for discussion, or
yes.
Do I?
Yeah, cool. So now I paused it. So what you all can do is to unmute your mics, okay? And then Team 1 can start asking questions about the weakest point, anything that you need to know in order to prepare for rebuttal in round 2 and 3, okay? You have 3 minutes, and then Team 2 will reveal what your points were. So yes, Surabhi, did you have another question?
Oh, no. So I mean, so me and Nitya can discuss now for the next round.
Yeah, so and also this is an open discussion round, so you can keep your mics open, and if you want, you can ask questions if you need from your opponent. Any questions you may have. Or if you guys want to discuss, you can just say we'll just discuss, so we can mute the mics. Completely up to you.
So Kuhu, I think the weakest point that you have chosen relates to your last point, right? Like how it is possible to have work and there is some work, but there's not enough discussion and not enough talk happening in order to expand the inclusivity of the art form. Is that why you choose that point?
For our weakest point?
For our weakest point as chosen by you.
Yeah, I would say the reason I chose this is the words during class, because I feel in the performance arena, we do see things being talked about where, can we expand this, or like, how do we include different themes? But I think that in classes, because we don't know what gurus are teaching their students, we don't know the conversations that students are having. And I would think that most gurus want to keep it as traditional as possible to set the foundation. But then what happens, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because you want to expand the repertoire, but at the same time, you don't want to make it seem inauthentic, or you want to instill the discipline into a student. But then what ends up happening is, as that student matures and as that student becomes a professional dancer in her or his own right, they feel that resistance to exploring new concepts because they're just not used to it. Like, it takes a long time. As seasoned dancers who are independent, or who are, who have their own artistic license, they want to go and do this stuff. Performance-wise, I do see that. But my concern is just within the classrooms, is this actually happening? If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Do you have any questions about anything? The strongest point, or? So is this also when Surabhi and I can discuss about?
Yeah, if you want to go offline and discuss, yes, but We recommend that, the more information you have about your opponent, the more answers you have, the more you can attack them, and really prove yourself stronger. So that's why we encourage this. But if you want to go ahead, yes, please.
Okay.
Team 1, your time is up.
Okay.
Now we will move to Team 2. You have 4 minutes. We did give the team 4 minutes. So you have 4 minutes to solicit any kind of information that you want regarding your opponent's strongest point, and also the weakest point that they think you have on your argument. Anything that you want to ask them, you can ask. And Team 1, please give them whatever they need to. Yeah, your time starts now. Team 2. Yeah.
Okay. I guess I just want to know why you think that this is the weakest point. Worshipping of the goddess and all that.
So when we think about like worshipping goddess, or like when we show stories about Durga or Kali or any of it, it's not that we are telling the story of just a Durga, and because Durga did this, only Durga can do this. That's not how we're portraying it. If an audience member is open-minded enough that they can absorb what that story is trying to tell them, possible that just through these stories, women can feel empowered. So I don't necessarily know if I don't know if it's like entirely necessary for us to specifically take stories of everyday women in order to convey these feelings to the audience. It is possible and it can be done that you can take stories of everyday women, but I don't know if it's necessary and if that's the only way to make the form more inclusive. The way that the stories are currently, it can also be inclusive to an audience, just the way that it's presented. So it comes, probably boils down to how the artist presents it. Like you said yourself in your second point when you were talking about Ardhanarishwara, right? You spoke about how it comes down to how somebody presents it. So I think this also comes down to how somebody presents it. So I didn't know if that was like a really strong point that cannot be countered.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of like rape or abuse and stuff like that, there have been a lot of pieces more recently done
Yeah.
topics as well, which is why we picked that. Actually, I think there was one year where everybody did a piece on women empowerment.
Yeah. No.
So, Surbi, you have any points to add to that? She was asking us why we thought that their third point was the weakest point.
Their third point is the weakest point. I felt, what you say is absolutely right, but the only reason why we chose it as weakest point is because there have been work that's being done as part of it. That's all. So, fair point what you made, and the only reason why we chose is because there are a few artists who are doing that.
Yeah, I agree. Am I allowed to say that? You can edit that out.
I agree with a lot of almost everything. So I don't know. It should just be a conversation, probably.
No, I think it's anyway. I'll reserve all that for the end. So I think we're just at about the time limit. So we'll keep moving ahead. So we're now on to our very first rebuttal round. Okay, it's finding the breach. What we will do is in this round, each of the team members will have one of their teammates take up the opposition's strongest argument and challenge it point by point. You will get 3 minutes to present this case. So as soon as team 1 is done, team 2 will go forward. Because this is a rebuttal, we're going to be kind of very strict with the time. So please watch out for my little pen that comes up. Okay, and maybe it's a good idea to start winding up as soon as you see the first warning. Okay, so we'll, as always, we begin with team 1. So I'm assuming Surabhi is going to go forward this time. Surabhi, your time starts Now, please state the argument and start your rebuttal. Start.
Um, Kuhokee, what the statements that you made was very well put across, and but I do the points that I would like to make is the first one, what you said, male characters with male perspectives is much needed in the dance repertoires today, especially when you say a mother taking care of a child, and why isn't a male character shown as that? I would say Vatsalya is a gender neutral emotion feeling, and if a dancer is presenting a piece which is Vatsalya based, both male members and the female members of the audience should be able to relate to it. Yes, there aren't many stories being told about men taking care of the child. Yes, which is important, but it's again ownership of the artist to create such pieces, either drawing from the mythology or creating new pieces of the present day. But the art is not limited that way. Art has the capability, and again, Vatsalya is gender neutral, so everyone should be able to uh, uh, feel that. And the second point you made is the yearning, the male. Why not show a male yearning? I like the statement you made, and what I see the most shown, the male yearning shown in the movies, Indian cinemas, whereas Indian dance mostly shows the female yearning, which is kind of contrast. Um, but again, that also, that feeling, emotion is again gender neutral. If a male dancer is presenting and he wants to show the yearning of a male, I think even as female audience being there, we will be able to connect with that. So and again, it's up to the artist to show which story to pull and how they portray that. But those emotions are very gender neutral. It's how they present it and how they connect with the audience as they are presenting is what matters. And the third, yes, there is an imbalance in the gender concept when in the concepts while presenting, also because there's an imbalance in the performers gender as in the gender as performers itself. So, and I think that's why there's that imbalance. um, but um, but yeah, as long as the focus is on the emotions, I think those that's how I would approach your point. Mm, and you spoke about Arjuna in the forest being a transgender for the year. I've not seen many people present that, but I think I agree with you. Like, if that is being presented, a lot of people in the audience will be empowered who relate to that character. I agree with you, and I think again, it's the ownership of the artist to create such pieces or pull out such pieces. Again, in the Indian mythology, it can be from the Indian mythology, but it can still relate to people. So, okay, sorry. Oh yeah. Last point about the goddess. I mean, worshipping as the goddess in the Indian mythology, but when it comes to women around us, there are being pieces created based off of the Me Too movement. For one example is Still I Rise, created by Vidya Subramaniam, which talks about women empowerment. There's another Unfiltered production that by three artists who did about the Me Too movement, and more productions like that. I think as artist community, we have to make this more reachable to the audience and talk about it more, so that the uh, audience understand that things like this are being presented, so they can go watch it and relate to dance in a way that they can connect.
Thank you, Surabhi. That was 4 minutes. Yeah. Um, Kuhokee, team two, your time starts more. You now you have 4 minutes.
Okay, so I guess with your strongest point, which I personally agree with, about emotions being universal, and although the stories might have that the Puranic, I would say, framework, this what we're conveying to the audience comes down to the raw emotion and how they feel. And I guess just from my own personal performance experience, if I'm doing I'm also not the million, right? I'm Bengali, right? So if I'm presenting a piece that's in Telugu, for example, which happens very often, a Bengali audience is not going to understand anything. They're just going to watch me and then see how I am telling the story and kind of guess what's happening. But that guesswork doesn't really matter. It matters how they feel about it, right? Like how they come out of it feeling. But I guess my only point against that would just be, should we just keep it to the stories from the past? Although I don't think that they're irrelevant, right? I think that they still hold as much relevance. And there are lots of stories that we're not telling that's from the Puranas. For example, the case with Arjuna, with the case of Shikandi, for example, like if you see modern televised versions of the Mahabharata, they've made Shikandi Shikandini, and then Shikandini becomes Shikandi just before the killing of Bhishma, and then she becomes a woman again. So there's this kind of resistance to seeing how women should be, how men should be. And Shikandi is a very polarizing character. So we have that, and I think that that is very relevant to today. But can we still tell mundane stories and make that a spectacle while still delivering those emotions? Because I feel like what happens is we hold ourselves so accountable and we depend on the audience to understand what we're trying to convey, but that might not necessarily relate. It's kind of like when you watch a movie, sometimes you do need the movie to tell you what they want you to take away from it, right? If it's like a film where it's just open to interpretation, that's one thing. But then if you want a specific message to be related, it's like, okay, this is what I want to show. And the means of showing that message maybe, and I'm not saying this needs to be like the majority of performances, but maybe something that we can incorporate more is like more mundane stories that we know because it's happened in our lives, it's happened in many people's lives or whatever. I hope that makes sense, because I don't disagree with that point. It's just, are we putting too much faith into the audience, right? Because like people come into a performance with their own experiences, with their own mentalities. So even though we want them to feel a certain way, they might not still feel that way if they're seeing a piece about Devi Durga, because Devi Durga represents so many things. I mean, she's a grand concept, right? But people still might not relate to it unless we talk about a woman that they know, right? So there's that. As far as the weakest point, like I've discussed before with Nitya, although we see performances of expanding ideas, we see people opening up the arena, we see people making more thematic performances instead of like stuff that's like solely based on a specific story. It's not in the vast majority, and I think that that's because the vast majority of gurus that teach don't teach the more inclusive repertoires, right? They won't, if you come up with a creative item, you're not going to teach it to your 8-year-old student, right? She's not going to present it in her Arangetram. It just doesn't happen for the sake of maintaining the like cultural framework of it all. And of course, I understand that, but it's like, how do we draw the line and how do we decide what's authentic and what's not, so that we create students or we raise students to think that art can be inclusive and art can be all of these things without conditioning them to say, this is right, this is wrong. And so when they're older and they want to tell different stories, they feel awkward about it or they don't feel right about it. So, yeah.
Okay. I think, Kuhokee, you also kind of moved on and you carried forward by that's okay. So it's just going to end up with Nitya kind of finishing the second point of rebuttal. I think you addressed the weakest point as well as been pointed by your opponent, did you not? Yes, you did. So Nitya, if you want to go ahead and take your turn to address the weakest point that was pointed by your opposing team, and if you want to go ahead and defend that.
The weakest point, like our weakest
What they
point,
lifted out to you, yeah, what they.
So I think, Kuhu, I completely understand where you're coming from. And as we were preparing for the debate, this was something that me and Surabhi discussed as well, about how, if students are, if like suppose we were talking about like arangetams and how that's the first time that most people come to a dance performance for the first time through an arangetam, and if the content presented there in an arangetam is really inclusive for everybody. So I completely get where you're coming from, and it makes a lot of sense. But I think that if I had to counter that, I would say that the reason why we teach our students the traditional pieces first is so that they understand how the art form is structured and what the art form actually carries. So before they go on to doing more, like, let's say, non-traditional innovative work, before we introduce them to that, they should probably have a really strong foundation on what this art form is built upon, so that when they, in the future, when they become artists of their own right and they're carrying it forward, they keep the integrity of the art form. And it's not that they just do any random work that they want and say, okay, this is my Bharatanatyam, but it's still rooted in the Bharatanatyam. And when people see it, they can still say, oh, this is Bharatanatyam, but it's telling me a story that I want to see. So maybe that's why people keep, make sure that at least when a student is learning, that they stick to more. Sorry about that. That they stick to more traditional work. That's one way of thinking about it. Maybe that's why they do it. And as far as conditioning students to think outside the box and to make them question things go, these are conversations that can be had within a class and within a dance class. And it's not necessary that you have to teach them a piece in order for them to be able to see that. Even just showing them work. Suppose a teacher does a piece that's outside the conventional thing, they can show the student the piece, or if they see somebody else do it, you can always show them the piece and then have a discussion with the student about it and say, see, this is not the only thing. Like, you've learned this padam, but that's not the only way that you can do this padam. Like, these are conversations that a teacher can have with a student, and you can expose them to it while still they're learning their traditional things, so that they know that, okay, I'm learning this now, but there's this whole world out there that I can also relate to. So I think that way it can be made inclusive for students as well.
Thank you, Nitya. With that, we will come to our closing arguments. So each team just has a minute to kind of sum up your closing arguments. We'll start with team one. You have just 1 minute and in a few words. Thank you. Your time starts now. Sorry. Yeah, Surabhi, either of you can.
Sorry.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, in conclusion, I would say that it is artists' responsibility to take the art and its content or the message to the audience in a way that they can relate to it. This doesn't just happen on stage. It has to start with the conceptualization of the performance itself, how we market it and target it to the target audience, engaging in dialogue, and how we can relate the concept with them. And also, if the intention is true and there's conviction in it, the artists will be able to give an experience to the audience which will be beyond the story and its every meaning. There's and also it's again the artist's responsibility to give that overall experience and emotion where the audience can go back with a feeling or of contentment or the message that the dancer wanted to give. And also it is important to kind of choose something that the artist is passionate about, but which is related to the current present day. Yeah, it's a lot on the artists, and also a lot goes into teaching itself, like the teachers, like what Nitya pointed out. It's very important to start the dialogue, maybe get the students' perspective, give them creative work where they bring their perspective and create something that how they feel about the world or about a topic, so that way they know that art has vast boundaries and they can explore it in a way that can reach generations to come.
Thank you.
Conclusion.
Kuhokee?
I would say in conclusion, even though we're both arguing for and against inclusivity in Bharatanatyam, it's really a yes and no answer, right? Because it's not completely inclusive, but it's not completely exclusive, if that makes sense, right? And I totally agree with Nitya's point where you have to set the foundation, but it can be so that a guru might show her students, I taught you this type of varnam, but look at this type of varnam where we're talking about Jesus Christ or something, and that might not be in the students' Arangetram, but they know it's there. They've seen their guru do it. That gives them the confidence to say that, you know, I can do something like this, right? Or Surabhi's point where it's, what if we got our students to do creative exercises where they could come up with something that's a different concept? Because what that does is it builds the foundation in that framework, because I do think that's very important. You need to know your art form. You need to know what is accepted and what's not, what makes it Bharatanatyam, you know, things like that. But at the same time, if you give your students exercises, that gives them the confidence as future dancers to become choreographers, to conceptualize things in a way that is creative, in a way that could reach future generations, right? Because all we can really do is adapt. Bharatanatyam adapted from being a Devadasi dance in various settings and situations to being a dance focused on bhakti to what is it going to be now, right? Without losing that bhakti aspect, without losing that devotional aspect that makes Bharatanatyam so special to us, how do we do that to reach people from different strata in society?
Okay. Thank you, Kuhokee, and Kassiyet, welcome back. I'm glad you're able to join us. Yeah.
It happened.
Don't worry
And
about
this app is also so different. I don't even know how to use this, and I'm just a bit lost in that.
So we're actually, with this, the format of the debate as it comes to an end. I'd like to invite our audience, Deva, who's been here listening to everything that you've had to present to her. And also at this point, I'd like to invite Apurva and Asha, who are also present and who've been helping out. So if you all can turn on. Yeah.
Hello.
Deva, do you want to? Hi. Hi, Deva.
Hello, everyone. Hi.
Hello, all of you. Hi.
So, Deva, we did this because for you.
Yeah.
We can bring back. So I just want to kind of tell all four of you who are here today that one of the ideas that we started doing this for was, we realized through all the work that we were doing that often these two spheres remain very, disconnected, right? And we hear something from the audience in our corridors, and we hear something from our dancers on stage, but then, we never close that loop. And we felt like that is possibly a very big reason for what's happening with our audiences today. So when an audience says something, how do we take it back to the community and bring and close that loop? How do we invite them into that space? Because every time we discuss solutions to such issues, they're kind of absent. So we wanted to also kind of test the waters and see how can we bring them one step closer if we do it in their presence. And I think that's what this debate was really envisioned for. So we have Deva here, who was present on that day when Jay Surya kind of gave us that really powerful insight about inclusivity. So Deva, you've been listening in, and I'm going to kind of hand over the floor to you if you want to tell us if we did convince you today.
Yeah. Okay. So firstly, hi everyone, and I just want to say that your arguments were really, really strong, and I was actually the the fact that you are taking feedback from the audience actually to work on it with such detailed procedures on a debate. I think this shows that you want to move one step closer to the audience, which is me, because I don't come from a dance background at all. I am the typical audience which you would expect. So I don't know a lot of mythological stories, but I know the names of the characters. I know some of them, and I've been to shows only where my friends perform. So I'm just going to be honest, where I don't take a personal interest and I'm not very updated about the shows that goes on. I am living in a very Carnatic. I live in Mylapore, which is I believed it's like where Carnatic music and dance, everything is very much it's available everywhere around me. But as a person in my mid 20s, I don't really go to a lot of dance performances, like I said, apart from the ones where my friends perform. So in with all that in mind, I found this debate very informative, which is my first point, because I really got to understand the perspective of dancers. Until now I have just been thinking that Bharatanatyam is not inclusive, because when I just one moment. Yeah, sorry. So I'm back. So okay, what was I saying? Yeah, so I was thinking that Bharatanatyam is not inclusive, and it only covers the common stories where there's Radha and then there's Krishna, the same stories, and then we come back to Mahabharata, and we revolve around the same perspectives, and that's frankly what I have seen too. I have seen these pieces repetitive, and then I thought, okay, is there something else that is added to these stories? And sometimes I also find it difficult to understand what the artist is trying to convey, because the songs are in Tamil and maybe I don't follow all the words through. But it was during one performance where my friend actually explained the piece before going to the show, where she explained everything to me, what the artist is trying to portray, the emotions and everything. And when I was in the show, I was able to follow it because of the explanation. So I think this is really helpful for people who don't know about the world that you all love so much, because we're not a part of it, but we would love to, if you try to introduce the story to us, so that even we would like to be amazed about the different stories that are out there. So I mean, in that way, that all stories wouldn't seem repetitive to me, just because I'm seeing the same characters over and over again. So that was, I think, Nitya, I think you also mentioned that we can introduce the stories beforehand, when before the audiences come for the shows. So I think I have some favorite points that I've noted down from all of your speeches. So I would just like to say that. Yeah. So one fresh perspective that I had was how Nitya compared the dance performance to watching a movie. So how we enter without knowing any the hero or the heroine, but how but still we travel with them throughout the whole the show, we as we see them, we try to relate what they're trying to feel, or their different emotions, their storyline and everything. I think that is a very fresh perspective, which I have not thought about it like that. Maybe next time when I'm going to a show, I will really try to travel with that particular piece, and not the whole perspective, and try to think that, oh, I don't know the backstory of why they are doing this. So I would probably just try to relate myself to that particular piece of what is happening at the moment. So that was um, a fresh perspective for me as well. And and yes, I think the fact that I think towards the end, I felt both the teams were inclined, uh, I mean, towards accepting that there is scope to improve within the framework, where to target the future dancers, where the gurus can give them exercises where they can work and try to experiment with art. That is what it can be about, to bring it to the audience, to bring and yeah, I get that the parts of sexual abuse, trauma, and the father perspective taking the power more than the mother. So all that can be new probably, and it might take you especially a lot of work to portray one small emotion. Yeah. And yeah, since a lot of work goes behind it, I think the fact that this is the step one, and I think with step two, where maybe if all of you can when you have next time, maybe even when you practice, you will try to see it in a different perspective, and try to make some alterations where the audience can link themselves, and try to make feel the emotions that you're trying to portray. So I think towards the end, I really like that part where there was, I mean, rather than just putting it out there that there's scope of improvement, there were solid points and ways on how we can improve. So I think that was my favorite part. So I think with all this, I think there is, I still believe. Okay. Earlier, I was thinking that there was no inclusivity at all, but now I think there is a little bit inclusivity when you say it sometimes it is in the hand of the artist to show the inclusivity. They sometimes portray the male characters also by themselves, so they try to show the both the male and the female perspective. But often it is like she said, it's lost in translation, because the audience, they are not fully aware about the stories, and they don't sometimes they might get lost to understand if they're really portraying the male perspective or the female perspective. So I think with all that, and like how you said, when there is scope of improvement, and the ways that the steps that you take maybe can create a different world of Bharatanatyam tomorrow, where tomorrow, I like, when there's a forum for me, when I can check out the performances and go attend one myself, with even when my friends are not there. It's your story that the story that you want to tell will want audience like me to come and watch it. We're coming for the art, and not um, okay, we're coming for the art to they appreciate what you have to tell to the world. And so that I mean, like, I shouldn't feel okay, it's the same story again, but rather it is a different perspective that they're trying to convey to the world. So I think adding all of us to your show is what makes it inclusive in the first place. I think us trying out Bharatanatyam, like how we go to a music concert, or we go to a stand-up comedy show. I think Bharatanatyam should also be one such place where, audience would want to attend one on during Margari season, or everyone should be excited to try something new. Okay, you know what? There's a new performer in town. We should check it out. It should be just like another trending show that's coming up. So I think it's entirely in your hands to bring that to us. And obviously, we will also look out for more shows where we can easily relate to when we start slow. So that's my
Thank you, Deva.
opinion.
The floor is now open for free discussion. Apurva, Asha, any of you, and to all four of you, I want to thank you all for spending, I know the email said 35 minutes, clearly it was way longer, but we enjoyed it thoroughly, and I am just completely floored by the kind of work you guys have put in, preparing for a debate, taking it seriously, and it's extremely encouraging. I know that Surabhi and Nitya teach. I'm not sure about Kuhokee and Kassiyet if you guys teach, but it's extremely encouraging to kind of think about how you're already processing this space. You know, you may not have come out and announced it, like we don't usually do that, but through the discussion, at least for me, that's what I'm hearing, right? I'm constantly hearing that you guys are also reevaluating this exchange, this relationship, which is very important for us, because that's who we make the art for. And I loved the discussion. I was nervous too in the beginning. I don't know what you guys were talking about. We couldn't stop you. You were just on a roll. We loved hearing everything you had to say. So now I'm going to just allow some time for Apurva and Asha to come on and say anything. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely, Smriti. Agree with you, and thank you to all four of you, Surabhi, Nitya, Kuhokee, and Kassiyet. This has been really an extremely enriching last couple of hours, for sure. And for me, one of the most heartwarming things that I've heard out of this session is, terms like, can I agree with the opponent team? And, that we're hearing you, and we completely understand why you have chosen this to be our weakest point or strongest point. And that was one of our main motivations also to kind of design these debates, because it's less about expressing what you think is right or wrong, and more about listening to the opposition view, right? So I think, it's absolutely wonderful that that just came out so naturally from the session. If you guys have time, I just wanted to kind of share a few things that, what I've heard out of you guys, and that's sort of inspired me to, towards thinking about something differently, or from what I already had, or if I had something sort of to offer. One of the things that I thought about, sorry if I'm not quoting who raised these points, because there have been so many wonderful points and I'm really struggling noting things down. But, one thing that I have always thought about in terms of inclusivity, and I think Deva also mentioned that in her summary, is it's interesting to think about, when we think of the idea of inclusivity, whether it's about catering to what different kinds of audiences want, or sometimes it could also be about drawing the audience into a world that is unfamiliar to them. That is also inclusivity, right? So we're kind of actually, perhaps with our existing repertoire, of course, given the fact that there is, it's completely in the hands of the artist as to how they present it to their audience. But I find it very interesting that, arguing it the other way around. Like when you say, hey, okay, should I give comedy because my audience likes comedy? Should I give romance because audience love romance? Or I say my story, or I give them the story that I'm convinced with, and I draw them into a world that they may have been previously unfamiliar with, and may, walk out having enjoyed that experience. So I think just recasting the idea of inclusivity, instead of saying it's for all kinds of tastes, but saying, can I give you as an audience a different experience, right, that you may have never had before? And I think to a good degree, a lot of our one argument in favor of our traditional repertoire is that, right? You're kind of, even as artists, we're definitely inhabiting characters that are so unfamiliar to even us. And you have to have empathy, and you as an individual have to be inclusive to empathize with that character, to be able to present it with conviction. So that was just one point sort of that I had. And responding to, I just want to respond to two things that I've heard, because I think that's kind of salient. One was this idea, I think the gender idea is extremely relevant to dance today, for sure. But both ways. I think I've heard both, things that have struck a chord both for and against for me personally. Because, when we talked about those two ideas of, especially of fatherhood, for instance, and I think it was sort of countered with the idea that Vatsalya is ultimately what a an elder or an adult has towards a child. Uh, it's possibly artists also slipping into stereotypes sometimes, right? Because even obvious songs, like Bharatiyar's very famous song, the Chinanjirikiliye, actually does not specify the gender of the person singing that song. But we tend to assume the moment we say Vatsalya, we assume it's a female, it's the mother, and that may be our own stereotypes as artists that kind of lead us to that assumption, because it's not that we don't have stories of fathers to tell, actually, right? But it's a question of sort of where we fit in. So it really comes down to choice again. And I think there was a very powerful statement for me that Kuhokee made about why should pining be associated with the female always. For me, I've always thought about the idea of pining as something that is non-gendered, but yet I think it's a very interesting question to ask as to why is it always cast into the female voice, even though you can play it in a completely non-gendered way. I think most of our Varnams don't need you to play it, as the female or the feminine, whichever way you want to think about it. But it's actually a very it's really made me think, and I'd like to sort of dwell on that further to say why though the personification was always female, why is that? And because there is definitely that sort of voice there in most of the things. So that's for me a very important question. And in terms of and the one other thing is, for me, I think as an artist sort of going away, I've always thought of the repertoire, the traditional repertoire, having that space, like it was discussed, so to sort of me to present it from a perspective or the conviction that I come to it with, yet it's possible. And I think that's an obvious thing, because I've heard it even from people that I've discussed with, that if you present the same concept of womanhood through Durga as against the story of an unnamed woman of today, it's probably just also a barrier that you're lifting for people. When you call it Durga, you're probably placing a barrier automatically for them. And I think that's a very, for me, was a very interesting thing to think about. But I mean, just plenty of interesting things that have come out today. And thank you all for like a very, very fascinating session. Asha?
Yes. Hi, all of you. Thank you so much for being part of this debate. I think Apurvaka and Sumatyaka and all of you have kind of summarized the thoughts. So I'm going to be a little bit more generic. For me personally, I think I keep switching between the audience and the artist, and even my place at Rooted kind of makes me switch between being an audience and the artist. And it's very heartwarming to see that it's finally coming to a circle. And that was our idea when we launched the debate, because when we were doing Codiwamples, we had these questions coming out from the audience, and immediately the next thought was, okay, we have these questions, what do we do with them? Do we give them our answers, or do we take it to our community and ask them to think about it? So that, and that's truly building a community, right? Which has the participation of both the artist and the audience. And to see that that it's all coming out live and it's working. Like, we have these beautiful artists from all around the world sitting here discussing about these points, and we have the audience who actually raise these questions. And to know that we've had a very thorough discussion is very motivating, and I am just looking forward to more such conversations. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. I'm going to say that on behalf of the team, actually. Thank you so very much. We had a wonderful, wonderful time having you all.
We'll just
take a picture.
Yeah, Asha, before that, I know Kassiyet got dropped off the call. So we'll kind of go through just final thoughts from everyone. I want to start with Kassiyet. Kassiyet, if you want to, whatever you want to add, take your time and...
Okay, so to actually be honest, I actually haven't thought about this so deep until this came up, right? So and to be honest, so I thought I'll work on this for a day for like few hours, and I'll be done. But I got so much into it. I spent so much time. Like the whole thing was so amazing that I actually haven't thought that. So like I thought like we kind of include everybody, but researching more and reading more, I figured out that we unfortunately do not include many things that we should be doing. So I think that we do include stuff, but it really has to probably with the time expand a bit more. And that's what actually now I've been thinking on, and perhaps work on different kind of pieces than I would usually do before. So I think that really changed the way I think in like about the art form. So thank you so much for that. It's been a beautiful journey of researching and reading and coming to actually know who I am, because I didn't know a lot about why I actually dance, because I'm not Indian. I wasn't born in India, and why do I even dance? So coming to this, I figured out like when I started at the age of 6, it wasn't about the art, like the art form itself, because I didn't know who is what. But what I really got, like what really caught my eye as a child was the beauty of the art form, like the way you, what a sari, a costume, the bells, um, the way it's kind of different. And also I was before I was kind of into ballet, so I didn't, so compared to that, it was eye-opening to know that every gesture like it basically has a meaning that I didn't know of. So, and coming to know as a child that the art form that we're doing at this moment is not just about the beauty of the dance and the art form, but it's also meaningful. Yeah. So yeah. So, and I think at that point, it kind of made me to question myself. Why do I exactly still dance? So it's kind of an ocean of feelings, emotions, and things like that. So yeah, I really enjoyed this whole journey of learning, reading, and expanding my mind more. So yeah.
Thank you, Kassiyet.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nitya, final thoughts? Suggestions, what you liked, please tell us. If this format was a complete failure, like you guys shouldn't be doing this, or if it was yay, so great, like anything, we'd really like to know, so we can take it forward from. Yes.
Firstly, thank you guys so much for organizing this. Like you initially said, right, dancers, we often talk in our own circles about many of these things. And for me, what I find that in our circles, we often just echo each other's thoughts. Like there's not a discussion, there's not like so much opposition that goes on, and it's not that you get new perspectives from it. So that way, this was great. And in terms of the format, I think when you sent the email, it was a little intimidating because it was like, this is like this round and this is 5 minutes. And we were like, oh my God, it's so formal. Like, how are we going to do this? Getting into it, like like you saw, everything, we exceeded the time limit by double. So I think it wasn't as intimidating as we thought it would be. Turns out we have a lot to say. Uh, in terms of takeaway, I guess for me, it's that just going back to the topic itself, for me, it was that earlier, like many years ago, when Bharatanatyam was originally practiced, the form inherently was inclusive of the society that it was practiced in, and because of where people it was presented to were coming from. Whereas now, as times have changed, we have to start thinking about the audience more. We have to make an effort as a performer or an artist to make the audience feel included. So that's my biggest takeaway from this is the fact that as performers, we have to think and we have to make that extra effort in order to make our audience feel inclusive. And maybe inherently, the form is not inclusive to the audience anymore.
Thank you. Kuhokee, final thoughts.
I'd also like to thank you for hosting this because I think it's very important to talk about these things. These are concepts that I've spoken about with my friends pretty much since I was a teenager because I am a native New Yorker who practices this traditional Indian art form. I'm not South Indian, so then there are things that have made me think about this a lot. Like, how is this relevant to me, and why do I care about it so much when I can't even understand Tamil? I can't understand these languages. And it comes down to the basic aspect of how it makes you feel, not only as a performer, but as an audience member, right? If you have a performance in New York, you will have an audience, no matter what it is. People are coming to see something different. If it was up to me, I do think that our Indian classical arts are very inclusive and they're relevant. Like I'm very against people remixing things, like Carnatic remixes to things and then doing nritta to these. I can't deal with it. I've seen it everywhere being performed and I'm just like, I have to look the other way. And I understand where that comes from. You want to transform the art form so that it's reflective of society today. But I don't think that that means that you have to completely dismantle the whole thing because then it's not Bharatanatyam anymore, right? You can't do Bharatanatyam steps to a Drake song and say it's Bharatanatyam because it's not. It's just not, right? And I think we can all agree with that. I did come into this knowing that we would agree with each other. It wasn't necessarily like I'm on this side, you're on this side, because again, I think we relate to both sides. Like we see how it can be inclusive and then we also can see how it's not. But yeah, I think that this is really important. It's important for us as dancers for the future generations to show them that you can still be rooted in the tradition and expand it, right? Because I think for all four of us, we're all on social media, we're all presenting our work, right? It's not like we're just quoting the Natya Shastra and that's it. We're out there performing, we're sharing those things and people are following us because they want to see these things, right? They admire those qualities about us. So it's important to, hold on to that, but then also take into account what the audience is looking for, right? Because you also can't alienate the audience and hope that they get what you want to show them. So yeah, I think that's all.
Surabhi.
Yeah, totally agree with everything that all of you have said. One thing that I wanted to say is thanks a lot for doing this because this dialogue is very important, especially in today's world. So one thing I wanted to share is I did this exercise with my students recently where I asked them to come up with I gave them some structure, basic outline structure, and asked them to come up with what say back to square one or boxed. I gave titles like this and I asked them to create pieces about they can do anything that they want. They can bring their perspective concept and create a dance work. It was so interesting to see how students their final work, the thought process that they had, and we had several review sessions. They had to first write a script and then get back for review. And then they had to create the first draft of the performance, then get back for review, feedback. So we had multiple sessions like that. And one thing that I wanted to share is a lot of my students found it hard to, I mean, their script was mind blowing. They had so many concepts in their head. But when it came to translating that to Bharatanatyam, they were like, how can I do that in Bharatanatyam? I don't feel like I can do this in Bharatanatyam. And when they tried moving, it was more like free flowing modern dance, or those kind of movements that was coming into their body. And how to translate that to Bharatanatyam was the hardest part for them, because all those emotions was there. And Bharatanatyam, as we say, it's very like expressive dance form, and they were fine. It was amazing. I was surprised that they were finding it hard to express through Bharatanatyam. So that dialogue between teacher and student, and trying to get them to make Bharatanatyam accessible to express their emotions that they have, is something that a teacher students can work on, and a teacher has to learn, because I have to learn. I found it hard to tell them, okay, these are the different ways that you can use Bharatanatyam to express your feelings, because those feelings are current, what this generation is feeling. So I think it's a learning for both teachers and students, and there's a long way to go. That's something that I wanted to share. And also another thing that I wanted to share is, like Deva said, she goes to performances to watch her friends. Like that, a lot of Arangetrams, there are so many people who go to watch because their family or relative or friend is performing. And if we don't target those people, we are losing audiences for Bharatanatyam. We have to make sure. And one of the things that I thought is important is, if the dancer herself is invested in the concept, the dancer, if he or she has a perspective of what is being presented, they will be able to share, like they will be able to talk about it to the audience passionately, get them involved, and then share the dance, the margam, or whatever she's presenting in the arangetram. If she is able to passionately talk about it, then the audience is involved, and they'll feel that, oh, this is for us as well, and they'll want to watch more Bharatanatyam, and they won't go back saying, oh, Bharatanatyam is boring. So that's something that I wanted to share as well, because I've heard a lot of these comments. And yeah, and thank you for doing this. This dialogue is very important. And
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you, everyone. So we'll